You know, I think in some ways the house is a little bit like the story of housing in Los Angeles, which is that Los Angeles is really extensively built, but it's also with an extremely low density. The kind of typical suburban condition of a single house on a lot with a front yard and a backyard, you know, that has obvious, you know, like this one, density implications. When we took this project on, we decided to increase the density, double it, from one house to two, without having a really negative impact and without having the kind of circumstance like, you know, not that there's anything wrong with the house across the street, but without having this substantial increase in density that really changes the relationship of the building to the street. So we wanted both sides of these to face the street, and we really wanted to avoid excavating for parking. So there's no underground parking, and that really simplifies construction and keeps it less expensive. So there are two side-by-side buildings. The roofs kind of flutter up and down. And that's really a consequence of one of the kind of fundamental characteristics of a building like this, which is that when you build side by side, you kind of bias the orientation of one side or the other. So in a kind of crowded neighborhood like this, that means you either have to open the entire side to your neighbor, which could then be built at a really high density, or you have to have a strategy for bringing light and ventilation in from both sides of the building. And so that was the strategy for the project. And this is really just kind of a screen to keep too much of the western light from coming directly in, this kind of upper level glazing. So this material is a treated wood, treated with kind of acetic acid. It's really durable, it never needs coating. And then in between each slat is this kind of little thin piece of stainless steel. So that's the kind of inverted batten in between. And then we sort of reimagined the kind of property boundary at the very front edge. So you can see this wall kind of like wobbles a little bit at the street to kind of put a planted edge right at the sidewalk. And then that shape kind of comes around to form this little courtyard here. So bringing the planted level up here made it so we could use relatively small plants and still get a lot of privacy.
But then, instead of putting up a fence with a neighbor...
Yeah, we used bamboo, and you can see this walkway kind of wanders back a little bit. They're generally native plants and kind of low water plants. But I think using, you know, these skinny little palms and the bamboo really strategically works really well in this kind of site. This is a really beautiful acacia that's gotten gigantic and really kind of feathery and lets a lot of light through, but gives you privacy.
Yeah, I like how you don't put up a fence or anything. I mean, you don't have many fences.
Yeah. So both sides have a small front yard, kind of linear organization here, and then there's a big piece of the building mass that's cut out for a courtyard. You know, I think one of the real challenges as a society, we need to kind of change our attitudes towards density. One of the real challenges is that our zoning and planning regulations really just kind of push all the mass of the building towards the middle of the site and make these kind of unusable side yards. And so in part, the kind of side courtyard was a way of recovering that kind of dimension of this kind of unbuildable space. So, you know, obviously when you have a kind of a linear kind of organization like this, you know, it stays linear through and through. Mm-hmm. So, you know, this is the kind of single piece that's double height, goes all the way through. As one roof goes up, the neighboring roof goes down. And so it makes these kind of elongated oval shapes. Those are the pieces of glazing that bring light into our side and to the other side of the house.
What are you using there?
So that's a tripled wall polycarbonate. It's kind of a thick resin-based glazing. Not operable, but brings tons of light in. Since this particular piece is oriented to the west, we also put that wooden screen on the outside so we didn't get too much heat. When I said they fit kind of like a jigsaw, that's exactly what's happening here. This stair in some ways kind of pushes into the neighboring unit, and the neighboring unit stair takes up this space here.
So that's your neighbor right there.
So the neighbor's stair, you know, on this mirror image, nearly mirror image unit, kind of fits and takes up some of our kitchen, and our stair kind of fits in the other direction.
It doesn't really matter. There doesn't need to be a straight wall.
No,
There's reason.
no, and it's a skinny little house, so making a stair that is kind of a double back stair really wouldn't fit in a space like this. So really all we did was just kind of keep lining up, living room, kitchen, dining, courtyard, a bedroom, a bathroom, and then there's parking at the alley. But here you can kind of see this is the kind of outdoor room. This is kind of a recovery strategy of allowing this to kind of turn into a room and reclaim the side yard setback. You can see from the edge of the building to the fence, that's the amount of space you just kind of lose.
You're saying the edge of
That's
the
as
building.
close as you can build to the property line. And as cities increase regulation, and I think for really good reasons, people are questioning the sort of legitimacy of planning regulations like that, because basically it just makes it so it's harder and harder to afford to build economically. If you really try to look at monetizing that, that's a huge amount of money. The assumption is that you could just afford to forfeit it. All it does is push a big mass to the middle of the site. Yeah, so this glazing, serves the living room, but it also kind of serves this upper part of the house. And you can kind of see this projection, this kind of wall surface projecting in, makes kind of a long football shape opening that lets light in up there. That shape we'll see repeated all the length of the second story, because as this piece of the roof tips up, the neighboring piece tips down. And that's what kind of creates that football shape on both sides and brings light in to both sides, to each unit separately. My wife's a professor at UCLA, so this is her kind of work area.
It's nice because there aren't really rooms, but you
It's
have
really just kind of
library.
continuous space.
Yeah.
So we've kind of configured some of the smaller rooms so you could finish them with walls if you wanted to make a tiny bedroom for kids. So in cold climates, what you have to do is kind of harvest light. In Southern California, it's really about kind of balancing light and bringing light in from multiple sources. Here's my study. As this roof kind of goes up to a peak, our neighbor's roof was brought down to a valley. And as her roof goes up to a peak, ours dips down to a valley. So this was really all about just getting enough of the roof line to be active and allow us to kind of let it fluctuate.
So important that it's not about maximizing the space.
Yeah. And even though the rooms are, relatively small, the fact that they're tall makes it so that they're never really very stuffy and they're really well lit. We get up early, so it doesn't really matter that it gets light early to us. This is cork.
What made you go that direction? Did you?
Well, it's resilient, it's super durable, it's renewable, doesn't need any finish. I'm a little bit surprised it's not more commonly used. It's a lot easier to put down than hardwood. It's not manufactured the way laminate floor is. It's pretty quiet. They used to use it in libraries a lot. Yeah, so the roof strategy here, I think, becomes a little more, obvious, where as the roof for our neighbor peaks up, ours dips down in that library we were just standing in. And then at the very end, where our master bedroom peaks up, hers dips down. And so really that kind of long oval window just kind of keeps repeating over the length of the house, and you can see a little piece of it right here as well. You can kind of see that the roofs do become a kind of a landscape of their own here. And I think really what we wanted to avoid, this kind of strategy is what our planning regulations lead people to build. Because, so there's one that's the street, but then that is kind of a blank facade facing the street. And then it's a duplication of units as it goes down the block. And we wanted to avoid that because then, each of these units only has a very limited amount of orientation, very little amount of daylight and ventilation. In Los Angeles, I think people are starting to recognize that the sort of housing crisis is related to the difficulty of building new projects. One of the solutions really is going to have to be building density at much smaller scale. At some point, the ADU becomes the size of a regular house. Then it really is just two buildings on a site. And I think in terms of the kind of surface area of the building and the sort of characteristics of the building itself, it would be much nicer if that was possible instead of these kind of large blocks of condos. And we're not going to be able to solve the housing crisis by building 100 units at a time, but there are 500,000 single-family houses in Los Angeles. If we change the density of those, that's a really substantial change in the overall number of units.